What did the Buddha do to achieve enlightenment? Welcome back, everyone, to Mind Podcast. According to you, does enlightenment equate to nirvana? Recently, through following Buddhist events, I have noticed a common trend. Most of us still hold the belief that diligently practicing, chanting Buddhist scriptures, and making offerings will one day lead us to boundless blessings and ultimately enlightenment. But this is not entirely correct. We tend to search everywhere, exploring various methods of practice. Today we study under one teacher, but then discover another teacher whose teachings seem better. If one method seems challenging, we switch to another method that appears more effective. We end up trapped in a cycle without finding a way out. Take a moment to stop, just 30 seconds, and ask yourself, why are we practicing? What is the ultimate goal of practice? Is it enlightenment and liberation? Do we truly understand what enlightenment means? And is it only Buddhism that can lead us to enlightenment? What about other religions? Let's explore these questions in today's video. Unlike the religions originating from India, the monotheistic religions rooted in the teachings of Abraham, such as Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, do not have the concept of a self-directed path to enlightenment. The scriptures of these religions do not contain any terms equivalent to enlightenment or liberation. Instead, saints in these traditions encounter God through divine revelation. For example, Jesus Christ experienced revelation in the desert, and the Prophet Muhammad received revelation on Mount Sinai. These monotheistic religions are based on faith, and their followers do not pursue personal enlightenment, but instead rely on divine blessings from God. In Christianity, the term illumination is perhaps the closest to enlightenment. According to the Bible, Jesus Christ's spiritual illumination began when he was baptized and blessed by John the Baptist in the Jordan River. This signifies that spiritual illumination in Christianity requires baptism and divine grace. The Abrahamic religions do not promote practices aimed at achieving liberation as a final goal. Instead, they emphasize maintaining faith to reach heaven. The hope and aspiration of believers in these religions are to reach heaven after death. Heaven is understood as a realm of immortality and happiness. In Islamic mosques, depictions of paradise can be seen on walls, portraying scenes of joy and bliss, which resemble the concept of celestial realms in the Buddhist worldview. In Hinduism, enlightenment is believed to be the union with Brahman or communion with the heavenly realms. This communion is achieved through meditation techniques, such as yoga, or even by the power of faith. According to Brahmanic philosophy, when enlightenment is attained, the individual ego is no longer confined to the earthly body, but expands into higher and more vast realms. Ultimately, the goal is to become one with the Supreme Self, Atman. Famous contemporary Indian spiritual teachers, such as Vivekananda, Jiddu Krishnamurti, and Osho, often spoke of becoming one with God. Enlightenment in Hinduism is typically described by phrases like, all is one, or unity with the divine. However, according to Indian philosophers, no Hindu religious tradition has fully achieved the absolute unity with Brahman, the ultimate supreme self. Union with Brahman remains an ideal within the scriptures. In practice, the various sects of Hinduism often worship specific deities rather than Brahman itself. For example, they might worship Brahma, the god of creation in the realm of form, or other deities such as Vishnu, Shiva, or Saraswati from the mythologies of Indian philosophical systems. Many Vietnamese mistakenly follow Brahmanic practices, thinking they are part of Buddhist tradition. These practitioners believe that experiencing light in meditation marks success, as they regard light as the essence of the world and equate it with the Buddha nature. Osho, a renowned contemporary guru who claimed no affiliation with any particular school of thought, defined enlightenment as the light within. He stated, "Enlightenment is nothing but you becoming light. Your essence becomes light. Enlightenment is simply the experience of your consciousness being unpolluted by delusions, sensations, or emotions. When the mind is completely empty, it becomes an explosive experience, a mental atomic explosion. All your wisdom bursts forth as light without origin or cause. Once it manifests, it stays with you forever, even in your sleep. That light shines within you, and from that moment on, you can perceive everything in the world in a profoundly different way. After such an experience, no questions remain within you." Osho emphasized the experience of inner light and regarded it as the definitive sign of enlightenment. This concept aligns with the understanding of enlightenment in many meditation traditions within Indian spirituality. However, in Buddhism, while inner light can arise during meditation and insight practices, it is not considered a definitive sign of enlightenment. Buddhism offers a nuanced understanding of the nature of inner light. In the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha discussed radiance and light but connected these only to wisdom. He described 4 types of radiance. 1. The radiance of the moon. 2. The radiance of the sun. 3. The radiance of fire. 4. The radiance of wisdom. When the Buddha gave his first sermon, he spoke of light emerging within him during his enlightenment experience. Monks, with regard to the truths I had never before heard, vision arose within me, knowledge arose within me, insight arose within me, wisdom arose within me, and light arose within me. This light arises when the mind becomes deeply concentrated and united with insight. Such a mind generates radiance purely from within. With this light, one can penetrate the ultimate reality and perceive things as they truly are. Thus, in Buddhism, light serves as a byproduct of wisdom. But enlightenment is not defined by light alone. It is the profound realization of ultimate truth. This concept can be likened to entering a dark room. We need light to see everything within. However, the perception of light in meditation differs greatly between Hinduism and Buddhism. In Hinduism, light in meditation is seen as an end goal, whereas in Buddhism, it is merely a means of practice. Some meditators may feel joyful when they experience visual or auditory phenomena during meditation. However, true meditation involves the effort to still the restless mind. Thus, hearing strange sounds or seeing unusual forms can indicate failure in meditation rather than progress. During seated meditation, the body's nervous system can become imbalanced, and the mind is prone to falling into hallucinatory states. The types of insights generated in Brahmanic meditation are known as insights of concentration. These insights, derived from various forms of concentration meditation, can only lead to celestial realms within the 3 planes of existence: the sensual realm, Kamaloka, the form realm, Rupaloka, and the formless realm, Arupaloka. However, these insights cannot lead to the realization of nirvana, nor can they end the cycle of birth and death, samsara. The term Buddha, the Enlightened One, was known and used before the historical Buddha appeared in India. It referred to enlightenment, and spiritual seekers often pondered the question, who is the Buddha? Who has attained enlightenment? There is a well-known story of an elderly Brahmin named Bavari, who heard rumors that the ascetic Gautama, reputed to be the Buddha, had arrived in his town. Curious, Bavari decided to meet him. When the Brahmin arrived, the Buddha was in the middle of a discussion with many people. Since Bavari was well respected, the crowd made way for him, allowing him to approach. The Buddha also recognized Bavari as a venerable Brahmin, a teacher of many generations, and invited him to sit at the front of the assembly beside him. Bavari then addressed the Buddha. "Venerable Gautama, I wish to ask you some questions." The Buddha welcomed his inquiries, and Bavari presented his questions in a 4-line verse, asking the fundamental question, "How can one be called the Buddha, the Enlightened One?" The Buddha responded with a verse, "What should be known, I have known. What should be abandoned, I have abandoned. What should be developed, I have developed. Therefore, O Brahmin, I am a Buddha." This response succinctly highlights 3 essential characteristics of an enlightened being. These qualities are not exclusive to a Buddha, but also represent the 3 goals we strive toward when following the Buddha's teachings. If someone asks the fundamental purpose of taking refuge in the 3 jewels, following moral precepts, or practicing meditation, your answer should align with these 3 points. Fully understanding what should be known, letting go of what should be abandoned, developing what needs to be cultivated. These are the goals of the Buddhist path and the 3 achievements that mark the attainment of enlightenment. If you are familiar with the Buddha's first sermon, you will recognize that these 3 tasks correspond to 3 of the 4 noble truths. The first noble truth is the truth of dukkha, often translated as suffering, dissatisfaction, or stress. The task related to this truth is to fully comprehend it. The second noble truth is the origin of suffering, known as the truth of samudaya, the cause being craving, tanha. The task here is to abandon craving. The fourth noble truth is the Noble Eightfold Path, known as the truth of Magga. This truth needs to be cultivated. One noble truth not directly referenced in the Buddha's verse is the third truth, Nirodha, the cessation of suffering, also called the truth of Nirodha. It carries its own task. The cessation of suffering must be realized. When the first three tasks are accomplished, the realization of the truth of the cessation of suffering will naturally follow. You might have encountered representations of serene lotus flowers, the majestic Dharma wheel, or intricate pagodas in Buddhist art. However, do you know that the Dharma wheel consists of an axle, spokes, and a rim, symbolizing the three aspects of the Buddha's teachings: ethics, wisdom, and concentration? Or have you heard of the terrifying ritual objects of Tibetan esoteric traditions, such as the kangling, a horn made from a human thigh bone? This instrument, shaped like a curved horn, emits sounds that please wrathful deities while instilling fear in all evil spirits and demons. Possessing such a thigh bone horn symbolizes the deity's control over the three realms. A comprehensive understanding of the rich symbols, mythical motifs, and mysterious rituals is essential. Above all, it invites us to admire the unique artistic beauty and profound philosophy of Buddhism, particularly Tibetan Vajrayana Buddhism. In the ancient world, the Handbook of Tibetan Buddhist Symbols was considered a must-have. This book remains one of the best sellers in the art and religious photography category on Amazon, after 8 years of dedicated research. It features meticulously hand-drawn illustrations by Robert Beer, exclusively for this work. Readers will explore the exquisite art of Tibet, admiring the vibrant beauty of Buddhist paintings, statues, and artifacts deeply embedded in Tibetan cultural identity. This book is not only for those passionate about Buddhism, but also a wonderful gift for artists, designers, and lovers of Eastern art and culture. Ultimately, it appeals to anyone who appreciates spiritual values, seeking knowledge and enlightenment. This book will guide you toward the spiritual values of Buddhism, helping you find inner peace and discover the path to enlightenment within yourself. The teaching that our task is to know what should be known raises an essential question. What is it that we must understand? What we need to know and comprehend are the things closest to us, what we usually consider as our self. What we call the self is, in reality, a complex combination of body and mind. For most of us, from birth to death, our minds are directed outward, constantly seeking pleasure and sensual gratification to elevate the self and affirm the identity of the ego. Very few take a moment to stop, turn inward, and reflect. What is this thing I call myself? What is the I behind the identity I create for myself? If you pause for a moment, you will realize that this is perhaps the most important question we can ask. If, from the day you were born until your final breath, the best you can do when asked, "Who are you? What is your identity?" is to present a driver's license or birth certificate without truly knowing who or what you are, then you have embarked on a rather poor journey from birth to death. Following the Buddha's teachings, our task is to investigate what we mean by I, me, and mine. These terms seem to point toward a lasting, solid entity, a self or ego that possesses a true identity. However, the Buddha taught that all such notions are deceptive. When we scrutinize these words, I, myself, and mine, we find only the components of bodily and mental experiences. To support this investigation, the Buddha neatly classified these components into 5 aggregates, known as the 5 aggregates of clinging, or 5 skandhas. These aggregates represent the elements we cling to with the mistaken belief, this is mine, this is who I am, this is my true self. Thus, we realize that behind the concepts of I and self lie only the 5 aggregates, skandhas. 1. Form aggregate, rupa skandha. This refers to the physical body and the material elements that constitute it. 2. Sensation aggregate, vedana skandha. These are sensations, pleasant, painful, or neutral, arising from contact with objects. 3. Perception aggregate, sanya skandha. This involves the mental function of identifying, recognizing, and remembering the characteristics of things. 4. Mental formation aggregate, sankhara skandha. This includes various mental activities such as intentions and volitional actions. 5. Consciousness aggregate, vijnana skandha. This is the light of awareness arising from the 6 sense bases, eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. Together, these 5 aggregates make up what we conventionally call the self. Our task, according to the Buddha's teachings, is to recognize and understand the true nature of these 5 aggregates, thereby realizing what constitutes our real identity from birth, through adulthood, old age, and finally death. This entire process is merely a continuation of the 5 aggregates, bound together by conditions and arising due to specific causes. Through insight into impermanence, we see that all beings arise and pass away. This realization brings a deep understanding of suffering, for the aggregates by their nature are unstable, unreliable, and insecure. Recognizing their impermanent and ever-changing nature, we come to see that these aggregates cannot be identified as our true self. They are empty and without inherent self. This is the teaching of Anna, non-self. The second goal taught by the Buddha is to abandon what must be abandoned. What must be abandoned are mental defilements, kilesa, a term used to refer to all mental states that cause suffering and unhappiness in our lives. The Buddha's teachings provide a detailed examination of the mind, helping us understand how it functions. These investigations are not carried out in the abstract way that modern psychology might describe mental processes. Instead, Buddhist psychology clearly identifies values and insights that guide us toward liberation and well-being. It draws clear distinctions in terms of ethics, without hesitation or ambiguity, because ethical distinctions are crucial for our pursuit of happiness and avoidance of suffering. According to the Buddha's teachings, unethical actions and unwholesome mental states can never lead to true and lasting happiness. Instead, they inevitably sow the seeds of suffering and misery. It is true that polluted mental states, particularly greed and desire, often bring with them a sense of pleasure or delight. If this were not the case, the world would be full of enlightened beings. However, the pleasure associated with craving and greed is merely a superficial layer covering harmful seeds. When these seeds sprout and bear fruit, they bring suffering, whether in this life or in future lives. Conversely, wholesome mental states may sometimes be accompanied by present discomfort, as growth often requires us to go against the natural inclinations of the mind. However, when these wholesome states take root and bear fruit, they inevitably bring happiness, peace, and inner tranquility. This process aligns with the moral law of cause and effect. Unwholesome mental states are referred to as kilesa, often translated as defilements, because they cause suffering. They can also be translated as pollutants, because they taint and corrupt the mind. The Buddha analyzed the nature of these defilements and beautifully explained how they can all be traced back to 3 core pollutants: greed, lobha, hate, dosa, and delusion, moha. Our task, in following the Buddha's teachings and practicing the Dhamma, is to overcome, eliminate, and abandon these defilements. Greed and hatred, which give rise to many other branches of suffering, ultimately stem from ignorance or delusion. Thus, the ultimate aim in removing defilements lies in eliminating ignorance, which is the root cause. We must eliminate ignorance, for ignorance obscures the 5 aggregates, leading us to mistakenly believe in concepts such as I, mine, and self. The way to overcome ignorance or delusion is through the first task, knowing what should be known. When we know what needs to be known, ignorance disappears, and with it, greed, hatred, and all other defilements vanish. However, this cannot be achieved simply by wishing for it. We cannot expect to merely think, I want to know what must be known, and have it instantly understood. This is why the entire practice of Buddhism is a gradual process of following a path. The great gift that the Buddha gave the world is not just a profound philosophy or psychology, but a practical, systematic path that can be applied in every aspect of life. Following the path means developing what needs to be developed. This is the 3rd task mentioned in the Buddha's 4-line verse. What should be developed, I have developed. What the Buddha developed is precisely what we must develop. One cultivates the path to abandon what must be abandoned, namely the defilements. And one also cultivates the path to know what needs to be known, the 5 aggregates. How does one develop this path? Once again, the path is structured to progress gradually, step by step, not suddenly. This structure helps us climb the ladder toward liberation and enlightenment. The first step is to control the coarser manifestations of defilements by adhering to moral discipline. One accomplishes this by observing the precepts, such as the 5 precepts or the 8 precepts, which help restrain the more obvious forms of defilements that manifest as unwholesome actions. Observing the precepts is not only about refraining from negative actions, it also involves actively cultivating positive actions. Through this practice, we gradually purify the mind, reduce the influence of defilements, and progress step by step along the path toward liberation. Ethical actions cultivate the mind with pure and wholesome qualities. One must cultivate compassion and kindness toward others, honesty in interactions, truthfulness in communication, and responsibility toward family and society. Practicing right livelihood with diligence, respecting others, maintaining patience during difficulties, and being humble and upright, these virtues gradually purify the mind, making it clear, bright, and radiant. However, developing ethics alone is not enough. One must go further and cultivate concentration, samadhi. When we make efforts to collect and focus the mind, we begin to understand how it functions. Through observing our mental processes, we gradually reshape the mind, weakening and eroding unwholesome and defiled qualities. This process is like scraping away the soil that holds unwholesome roots. These roots have existed within us since beginningless time. Thus, the path is neither quick nor easy. It requires gradual effort, persistence, and dedication. With consistent practice, the mind will become stable, steady, and well-concentrated, developing the capacity to remain focused on an object without wavering. This stability creates the conditions for the emergence of wisdom. Wisdom, panya, is the third quality that must be cultivated. Wisdom arises through reflection and investigation, not merely from meditation, but also in daily life. By studying the Buddha's teachings, particularly core teachings such as the 5 aggregates, dependent origination, and the 4 noble truths, we explore the Dhamma, fostering conceptual wisdom. In doing so, we begin to uproot ignorance at its core. Simply studying and reflecting on the teachings already starts to loosen the deep roots of ignorance. Yet, ultimate wisdom comes from direct experience. When one has developed a strong and stable mind, it is used to examine the 5 aggregates. Through direct observation of one's own experiences, one sees their true nature and the actual characteristics of phenomena. Initially, one observes the arising and passing away of the aggregates, gaining insight into their impermanence, anicca. Seeing their impermanent nature reveals that they are unsatisfactory, dukkha. Nothing in them is worth clinging to. Because they are impermanent and unsatisfactory, one realizes that they cannot be identified with a true, enduring self. This is the insight into the emptiness or non-self, anatta, of the aggregates. This marks the awakening of vipassana, insight meditation. With insight, one continues to cut deeper into the roots of ignorance until the true nature of the aggregates is fully understood. When one can say that they have known what needs to be known, the defilements that should be abandoned are eradicated, and the path that needs to be developed has been cultivated. At that point, one realizes what must be realized: the cessation of suffering, here and now. According to the Buddha's words, this is the condition that defines an enlightened being, a fully awakened one.